So to review, proteins, which are chains of amino acids, they come in different versions, so to speak, different formats. You can have structural proteins, like the ones we're talking about here. So, if you have wrinkles forming, that's because of a collapse of a very important protein that's below your skin called collagen. And when collagen collapses, unless you're a Kardashian, you would just deal with wrinkles, right? So collagen is what we call a fibrous protein, and it's not just found in your skin, it's found in your joints. That's why grandma's knees don't work so well anymore, because collagen doesn't last as long as we last. Another protein that you see jetting out of your body, your hair, is called keratin. So keratin is certainly a structural protein, but what can you do with your hair? Can you pick up shit with your hair? What can you do with your hair? So it has some strength to it, but it's not really that strong. Think about a single piece of hair. Can you pull that apart? Sure. Can you rip all the hair out of your head at once? Unlikely. So the strength comes mostly from the numbers, so to speak, of the hair, or the quantity of the hair. So these are structural proteins. Structural meaning you can't do anything with them. What about proteins that can perform tasks for you? Well, we call those proteins enzymes. And we're going to learn, I think, a fair amount about enzymes this semester, but the way to introduce them is to talk about them as being proteins that have catalytic function. Catalytic, meaning it can do something for you. Catalytic is C-A-T-A-L-Y-T-I-C. So catalytic means the protein can perform a job for you. What's a very, very easy way of illustrating this? Well, maybe the enzyme can take A and turn it into what? B. Let's just leave it like that, okay? So this is as generic as we possibly can be. So enzymes are proteins that convert something into something else. There's more fancy, sexy words for this, right? Sometimes we say enzymes convert a substrate into a product. So the conversion of one thing into another is usually facilitated or performed by an enzyme. So you've got enzymes all over your body. Some of them are funny looking like this, and they fit a very specific molecule. So let's introduce some terms that are not on the board. And boy, if I've taken my marker out and I'm going to write it on the board, you think I do that because I like the way my handwriting looks, or I do that because it's important? Probably because it's important. So let's use some terms. A ligand, L-I-G-A-N-D, is what docks in the enzyme. The enzyme has a very specific little docking site that we call, anybody know? An active site. So the ligand is a generic term for anything that fits perfectly into a docking site. Let's say this is a really shitty drawing of an enzyme's docking site. Would a substrate shaped like this fit in there perfectly? What do you think? Unlikely. What about a substrate shaped like this? What about a substrate shaped like this? Would that fit in? So the specificity is a good thing. What do I mean by that? The enzyme only works on a particular ligand. So enzymes are highly specific. If that term doesn't make it into your notes, you're going to not do well on that question on the exam. So enzymes are very, very, very picky for what ligand they bind. So I've drawn an extreme example here. If you look at the board, you'll see that the substrates, in this example, molecule A and molecule B, they fit into the enzyme after the enzyme kind of bends around them. Okay, certainly it's a little bit more complicated than the way I'm introducing it. Sometimes it's referred to as what's called a lock and key model. If I take my key for my front door and put it in this damn door, it doesn't open the door. It's a very specific thing you're looking for. So I said enzymatic or catalytic, but really it's correctly identified on the board as function, right? Proteins that can perform a function for you. That's what an enzyme is. Let's give you some examples of particular enzymes. Does anybody know of an enzyme? Let's pick one that some of you may actually not have. Ready? What is this? For those that can't read my terrible handwriting, that's lactase. What is lactase? Anybody hear this?
Is it like part of the DNA?
No, that sounds really smart. Keep guessing. Anybody look in the fridge at home and you see milk hopefully. Anybody have an allergy or don't really process milk well? Anybody? Statistically, a couple of women in the room do have this. Anybody? Okay. So you don't have dairy or just milk? You drink what? Soy milk, which is not milk. Okay. Good. So that means you might be what's called lactose intolerant. Everybody ever heard of that? Lactose intolerance, which is actually common in Asiatic and Indian cultures. You think about the cuisine of these cultures, not a lot of milk in it. Lactase is an enzyme that breaks down the sugar of what? I just said it. Lactose. So if this is the first time you're hearing of it, shame on your teachers before me, and write this stuff down. So lactose is a sugar that's in all dairy. So if you eat milk, if you eat ice cream, if you eat cheese, you're getting lactose. People that are very lactose intolerant cannot process those foods anymore, meaning when they eat it, they have to immediately go to the bathroom. So lactose intolerance comes from having not a, let's say, good version of the lactase enzyme. If you don't have a good version of the enzyme lactase, who do you have to yell at? Your parents. Go kick your parents in the groin. That's where you got the genes from. That's where you got the DNA from, right? You didn't get it from Costco. You got it from your parents. One from mom and one from dad. So the enzyme for lactase is, you've been given it, you'll give it to your kids one day, and that enzyme allows you to process all dairy products. If that enzyme doesn't work correctly, you can eat all the ice cream you want, you're just gonna kind of be like a bird later on, pooping out stuff that you ate all day, okay? That's for really extreme lactose intolerance. Most of us that have a little bit of lactose intolerance, we would feel a little gurgling and upset stomach after drinking a gallon of milk, okay? That'll be the next fucking internet challenge, instead of the ice bucket challenge, drink a gallon of milk and throw up on Facebook or something. So lactase is an enzyme. What's another enzyme? Everybody ever heard of any other enzyme? Ligase, that is certainly an enzyme. How do you know that? Sounds cool? It's a binding for Jesus Christ. Oh, look at that. And where's the back? You know? Smarty? Wow! During DNA replication. That's correct. That's it. What? Glucose is a sugar, but you could sound really smart by changing the OSC to ASC and then calling it glucase, which is the enzyme that breaks down glucose. You'll notice a pattern emerging here. Whether it's ligase, lactase, or dehydrogenase, whatever, enzymes seem to end with what? ASC. So I know nobody in the room has drank alcohol yet. Oh my God. But there's an enzyme called what? Alcohol dehydrogenase. You don't have to know this yet. But if you don't have that enzyme, you can't tolerate alcohol. And people from a part of the planet called Tibet typically lack a receptor for this, meaning they lack one of the enzymes. So they can't drink alcohol. Alcohol literally would be a poison to them immediately. So there are literally tens of thousands of enzymes in the body. You don't need to know their names. I'm just highlighting one as an easy example. So you're walking through the grocery tomorrow and you see soy milk, goat milk, almond milk, which is basically pulverized almonds and water. All of these alternatives exist for percent of the population that can't tolerate lactose anymore, okay? Were we lactose, even like, so you say you were mildly lactose intolerant? Did your mom breastfeed you? Yeah, so what happened then? So her deduction, which is correct, is you must be, when we're born, capable of eating what? Milk. What does your mother have to offer you? Ice cream, chocolate, bananas? What is mom producing all day long for you when you come out of her? Milk. And all of us, whether or not you were breastfed or not, none of us were lactose intolerant really as babies. Then what happens? Is anybody still breastfeeding from their mother? If they are, called Child Protective Services, right? If you're not really capable of processing sugar anymore, we call you lactose intolerant. But none of us, including those that are lactose intolerant, had that problem as babies. So what's unique about us as humans, right? Anybody have a cat at home? Anybody have a cat? You know, the stupid thing that'll eat you when you die in the apartment before the police come? You know what cats are? Cats, what do we feed cats? What do we make them drink? Milk. You know what the cat does when he sees the milk coming towards him? The fuck is this, right? Cats don't normally drink milk. Name an animal that has milk in adulthood besides us. Think like evolutionary biologists. Think of a time when you heard a monkey jump the fucking fence at a farm and squeeze some milk out of a cow, then went back to the zoo. Has that ever happened? Animals don't have dairy or milk in adulthood. In their juvenile stage, yes. But us as adults, should we be having milk? You can make the argument probably not. I'm not saying don't have milk. I'm just saying we're not really supposed to have exposure to that product as adults. Anybody have any thoughts on that or opinions? Anybody think of another animal that we feed milk, aside from the stupid cat? No? Most animals would be surprised if you gave them milk. What? Talking about a big cat now? No? A tiger? No. No, you feed them people. So that's enzymes. Any questions on this? Now, nucleic acids are such an important, biologically important molecule category that they get their own lecture later on this semester. The most famous nucleic acid, of course, being DNA, right? Which is what? It's our molecule of hereditary, right? That's why you look and smell and behave like your parents. It's why your kids will look and act like you. It's also a set of instructions to build you. So that's a nucleic acid, but the one that your book kind of focuses on is the one that provides us energy, which is ATP. But DNA, which you know as a double helical structure, gets its own lecture. It's obviously that critical to biological sciences. So DNA is a molecule of hereditary. It's the reason you look like your parents. If you don't look like either of your parents, something's gone awry, right? Of course you have the genetic potential to only look like your parents. It's also how we rebuild ourselves, right? When you have, anybody ever get a bad sunburn, what happens? Anybody? No one's ever gotten a sunburn? You know what the sun is? The giant glowing ball of fire in the sky. It's going to eat the planet in 4 billion years. So if you have a bad sunburn, what comes off you the next day? Skin starts flaking off. You lay it on your friend's head, right? That skin is coming off you, but do you need more skin? Of course. The instructions to build all the cells in your body come from DNA. That's your DNA. There's nothing more you than your DNA. I know you think your hashtag is more you than anything, and your graffiti is more you. No, your DNA is as you get. It's more personal to you than your thumbprint. So that is its own discussion, so to speak, we have to have later on in the semester, okay? By the way, we'll bring up some really crazy shit, like, you know what the prevailing theory on how DNA got to the planet is? There's 2 theories. One theory, commonly accepted by scientists, is, are you ready for this shit? Aliens sent it on a rock here. That's a prevailing theory in science, which is that it came here on an asteroid or a comet. This is not something out of a comic book. This is like a generally accepted theory. So DNA, we have really no idea how it got started, but we know that all living things have DNA in them. But it's a really important category of biologically important molecules. So we'll talk about it in a couple weeks, okay? Questions on this? Right now you're running out of energy, which is a way of saying you're running out of this thing, ATP, adenosine triphosphate. You can eat, as we'll find out as we begin the next lecture now, any food product and make energy from it. That's how miraculous evolution is. It'll allow you to eat bacon, it'll allow you to eat potato chips, it'll allow you to eat cotton candy and make energy. Do you think you should eat one of those 3 things exclusively? Probably not, right? So any food product you give your body can be used to generate something called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. This is like the battery of your body. Let me ask you, since everybody in the room has a cell phone, when your cell phone dies, do you just throw it in the garbage? What do you do with it? You charge it. You don't throw out something that has the potential like a battery. You just recharge it. That's what ATP is. So right now, I'm looking at a room full of people blinking and twitching and yawning and doing this. All of those little minor movements in your face are powered by hundreds of thousands of ATP molecules. Once you use up ATP, you have to recharge it, just like your cell phone battery. How do you recharge ATP? What do you think? You eat, and something else, very important, you breathe. So if you don't eat or breathe, if you fuck up both of those things, nature rewards you with extinction, right? You need to eat and breathe. If you don't do those 2, that's how critical it is, right? Nature doesn't say go to college. Nature doesn't say take the trash out, clean up after yourself, wipe your face. Nature says breathe and eat. And if you do both of those things, we'll let you live 1 more day. Why are breathing and eating so important? Well, we respire, right? We conduct aerobic respiration. You need oxygen. If you don't think you need oxygen, put a bag over your head, count to 100. You need oxygen and you need food to make energy. How do we really make energy? We take adenosine diphosphate, and we add a phosphate back on. I know none of us are chemists, but what do you think that makes? ATP. So when you have a uncharged, a kind of useless adenosine triphosphate molecule, we don't call it ATP, what do we call it? Adenosine diphosphate. Di meaning how many phosphates? 2. Tri meaning how many? 3. So just like that cell phone battery, you don't throw the cell phone out when it's discharged, you recharge it. We recharge adenosine diphosphate back into adenosine triphosphate. How do we perform that magic trick? Eat and breathe. Don't screw either of those things up. That's why we take it so seriously when you have an old person, like a grandparent in a hospital, and they say, I don't want to eat anymore. That's a warning sign, right? Because if you're really old and you stop eating, start a stopwatch. You got about 3 days left. That's it. So it's very important that you always have the desire to eat. So when we talk about food eating disorders in a little bit, this is an important point to kind of reevaluate. So adenosine triphosphate, you make a lot of this per day. Anybody have any idea how much of it you make per day? What do you think? How much of this molecule do you make per day? All of us. Me, you. We make about 70 pounds each in your body. So there might be people in the room that only weigh 90 pounds. You make about 70 pounds of this. Me, you, doesn't really matter. We all make about the same amount of ATP. That's how important this is. Think about it in relation to your cell phone. You would never throw your cell phone out when the battery dies, right? Think about the usefulness of the cell phone once it's fully charged, correct? You can do a lot with it. You can record class, you can ironically make a phone call, you can take pictures, you can look at internet porn, right? Think about all the things you can do with a cell phone when the battery is charged. ATP is constantly remade all day long, okay? And that's why when we discuss nutrition next, you'll see that you can survive off of cookies. Now, is the professor saying, go home and eat cookies only? Of course not, but there's literally such a thing as the cookie diet for dumb white people. You can look at it on Amazon. There's a book called The Cookie Diet in which you only eat cookies. Don't try this shit at home, kids. But it's possible to literally just eat nuts and survive because all we have to do with the food we're eating is make ATP, okay? Questions on this? I'm not saying eat cookies and nuts exclusively, okay? So let's talk about eating, ready? So why are we eating? We're eating not really because you're hungry, that's a joke your body's playing on you to get you to eat. We're eating because we need nutrition from the food we're eating. So I know how some of you will say, Professor, my favorite food is a steak, my favorite food is eggs. That's just a joke. Your body's trying to get you to consume food so it can draw nutrition out of it. Without that, you would never eat. Why do you think people that lose their taste buds don't feel like eating? You understand? It's the delectability of food, whether or not you like the smell or taste of it, and most of what we're tasting, by the way, is smell anyway. That's how we end up tricking ourselves into eating. That's why we try to make food what? Look good, smell good, have good texture to it, right? Make sense? If we just went to the cafeteria here and they handed you a plate of dirt, would you eat that? No. But guess what? Pregnant women sometimes eat dirt. Why? Anybody ever hear of this? By the way, all the women in the room are like, I'm never going to get pregnant. Anybody? So the female brain subconsciously will sometimes tell a woman, you're missing this mineral. And instead of the woman being able to interpret that as, okay, I'm going to go to the vitamin store and get some pills, literally that mineral is available in the ground. So pregnant women, it's a disorder called pica. You don't have to know this stuff. P-I-C-A. Women will eat dirt, they'll eat clay, they'll eat chalk. That's a very common thing because they're looking for some element that their baby is lacking. So that's nutrition. What's metabolism? We use this word incorrectly all the time. Sometimes we say, oh, I have my mother's metabolism or my father's metabolism. I eat food, it doesn't show up on my waistline, or I smell food and I gain weight. Metabolism is about how you get energy from the environment. Let's make sure we're clear on what that means for us. How can you get energy? What? You said it. Say it again. Okay, but how do you get your energy from the environment? You can't go out into the air and munch on ATP. So what do? You breathe and eat. That's it. We eat. Including if you're a vegetarian, right? You're still eating. The plants are screaming. You can't hear them screaming, but they're screaming as you're eating them, okay? So whether you're eating a piece of celery, or a piece of turkey, or a piece of tuna, You have to get your energy by eating something else. That's it. Every once in a while now, I'm sure this doesn't happen with high school age students, but I get a couple college students every semester that kind of think, it sounds scary, you're gonna laugh, that they can kind of get energy from the sun. Like as if they're a plant. And of course the answer is no, you can't do that. What are you, high? I have students every once in a while, usually a female student, usually someone who practices a lot of yoga, you know what I'm talking about? Kind of thinks you can sit in the sun and get energy. That's called a sunburn or cancer, right? That's not energy. Who can get energy from the sun? Plants, okay? So because we can never harness energy from the sun with our own bodies, we have to eat something else. So whether you're eating a cow or a piece of grass, you're getting your energy by consuming something that is pre-existing, right? And here we go with the word antagonistic again. We talked about this last week. Here are two antagonistic pathways. Metabolism, as my little down arrow would remind you, is all about what? Digestion, breaking down food. Anabolism, think about anabolic steroids, think about a Yankee, right? Anabolism is about building up stuff from smaller substrates, from monomers. So in your stomach right now, the food you had last night is just beginning to be catabolized. If you play basketball tonight, or you go to the weight room, or you exercise in any capacity, the muscle fibers that will be built while you're sleeping will be built via this anabolic pathway. So breakdown, build up, destruction, creation, whatever other damn analogies you want to use, fine with me. Questions? Okay. The problem with talking about nutrition is there's a certain amount of politics and there's a certain amount of what will be the other term we can use here? Agenda introduced into it. So for example, you may have, and your parents certainly have, and maybe even your grandparents have been told that fat is bad for you. Has anybody ever heard that at home? Fat is bad for you, don't eat steak, don't eat the butter, don't eat anything that's oily, right, because that's bad for you. But where did that thought process come from? So here's two actual articles, one in the New York Times, and one, meaning the primary research that was actually published in something called JAMA. You might have heard of JAMA, the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's one of the most official, serious, agenda-based journals in the world. And what was discovered is that in the 1960s, some doctors from Harvard accepted bribes from the sugar industry. They accepted about a $10,000 bribe each. Doesn't sound like a lot of money, but hey, whatever. And they basically lied and said that sugar seemed to be a healthy alternative to eating protein, to eating meat, and to eating anything with saturated fat in it like dairy or butter. So what do we now know to be the case? Well, that's actually the opposite of what's true. So if your grandfather had a heart attack, you know what the doctor would still be telling him today to do after his heart attack? Go become a vegetarian. That's how deep and ingrained this incorrect thought process has worked its way through not only academia here in a college, but the doctor's office. So the big joke of it is that sugar, which has been proposed to be an alternative, a healthy alternative to stuff like steak or turkey or even fatty tuna, is actually quite harmful for you. How so? Well, it leads to a really high mortality, likely cause of death for all of us in the room because we're alive in America. It leads to something called diabetes, right? So this is the problem with talking about what food is healthy and what quantity of the food is healthy, is that there was an agenda incorporated into the past 60 years of health science when it comes to food. So around the time I can remember, this was what I was told to eat. So long before you were even a blink of your parents' eye, this was how I was taught in elementary school to eat, which is have as much bread, pasta as you like. Eat cereal. Empty out the cereal bowl, put some more pasta in it, fat ass. Keep eating carbohydrates. That's what we were told. And what were we told to have almost none of? Fat. Even today, 2018, 30 years later, we still haven't adjusted correctly completely, right? What is this, the modern day food guide? Has anybody ever seen this thing before? Hopefully, right? Have anybody ever seen this dinosaur? Yeah. Okay. So this is what you're being told today, which I would still argue is a lot of calories from fruit, which is going to be a problem, and we'll explain why in a moment. but this is the modern day dietary guidelines from the USDA government. And this is the same exact agency 30 years prior telling us what to eat, which is, holy shit, eat as much rice and pasta as you'd like. 6 to 11 servings a day? How are you gonna get out of the goddamn chair eating 6 to 11 servings of pasta per day? By the way, in that category, that means pizza. Isn't that awesome? Right? Go ahead, have 6 to 11 servings of pizza a day. If I had 6 to 11 servings of pizza a day, I'd have a gravitational pull. You guys would be pulled towards me, right? Let's talk about the problem with having fruit to be that large of a wedge, so to speak, of this pie chart. Who's heard of this crap? By the way, this is fucking delicious. Anybody ever drink this stuff? Oh, it's wonderful, right? What's the problem with it? Well, it's called orange mango naked juice. The label used to say 100% juice, and it used to say pure fruit. They were sued in court, so they can't say that anymore, right? And then if you turn the bottle around, after your mouth is savored with all the deliciousness, and you feel good about yourself, you ate 47 oranges and 3,000 mangoes with the cup, with the bottle, you turn the thing around, you go, holy shit, I know that sugar get in there, right? Then you compare the amount of sugar in this to the amount of sugar in, well, what do you think I'm showing you here? This is a Coca-Cola can, Pepsi can. So if you ignore the fact that this bottle is a little bit bigger than a Coke or Pepsi can, they have the same amount of sugar. Does that seem like a health product? What do you think? Well, what's the problem with how we're taking in food? In this example, we're taking in food in a way you could never take that food in ordinarily. So what am I pointing to here? If you were to wander into this little cafe in the atrium, you could get this orange juice. This is what is considered to be a self-serve size orange juice. You're not walking around a gallon of orange juice. To create that much orange juice, you need to squeeze 4 oranges. Has anybody ever eaten 4 oranges in a day? It might be. Anybody? 4 oranges when you're on vacation in Florida. Okay. Now, this is a half-gallon container that's in your refrigerator at home right now. How many fucking oranges are in there? There's so many oranges, if they fell on you, you could die. 28 oranges, right? Think about the problem with this. Where do we come from evolutionarily? We come from a world where fruit was basically what? Scarce. We would never have fruit this time of the year in this part of the planet, right? So how could you ever consume 28? If I told you don't have any orange juice this week and said I want you to eat 28 oranges, many of you would consider that homework, right? If I told you today don't have any orange juice but walk around with 4 orange, juggle them before you eat them, right? And then eat them, nobody would have fruit. So the problem is that we're getting our calories from this particular wedge of the food guide. Not so much from eating the fruit, we're getting it by what? Drinking it. And this is the big dilemma that nobody wants to talk about. We're still having too many sugars from fruit because we're not eating fruit. We're drinking fruit. And when you're drinking fruit, your blood, the insulin in your body that processes glucose goes, how the hell did you eat all these fucking oranges? That's exactly what your body says when you have a half a gallon of orange juice in 3 days. Your body's perplexed as to how you had 9 oranges a day. Do you guys have orange trees growing outside your apartment windows? You just reach out the window and grab oranges? How could you possibly have access to this much citrus? Okay? Questions on anything I've mentioned here? By the way, if you agree or disagree, don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, I don't know, it doesn't make sense. My doctor told me to eat fruit. How come I shouldn't eat fruit? Which is not what I'm saying, by the way. I'm saying eat fruit, don't drink your fruit. Which, by the way, I'm guilty of too. I remember I started drinking this a couple of years ago, and then I got on the scale a couple weeks later, and I was like 7 pounds heavier. I'm like, what the fuck, how does it? And then I turned the bottle around, I realized I'm having soda, basically, that amount of sugar. How do we regulate food? Well, it's really about hormones. So when you feel hungry, there is a hormone being produced in your brain called ghrelin. You need to know this. Ghrelin makes you even more hungry. When you're eating, long after you've been shoveling food into your mouth, your brain then makes a hormone that works antagonistically to ghrelin called leptin. This makes you feel full. What we know about obesity is that it's very hard to eat your way to 400 pounds. Have you ever seen someone walking down the street that looks like they're 300 or 400 pounds? Sometimes we ridicule that individual. We think, oh, you've eaten so many cookies, look, you can't even get on the bus anymore. It's not really possible to eat your way to that size. if you were to look at those individuals' DNA, you would find out that they don't make leptin. And what does this mean? That means they never feel what? Full. They never feel satiated. Can you imagine a world where all you did was eat, looking to feel fulfilled? By the way, that's the problem with low-fat food. When you have low-fat cookies, they take the fat out and they put a lot of sugar in, so you still eat them. And you just delay the time to which your brain makes leptin for you, which means you're going to eat a lot. That's the problem with low-fat anything. You take fat out, your brain delays the production of this hormone. This is not up for debate really anymore. If you take a mouse and breed the mouse to not have this gene, to make this hormone, guess what the mouse looks like all the time? It looks like it ate another mouse. It's gigantic, right? If you want to Google leptin-free mice, you'll see fat mice. So it is correct to say you got to control what you eat, but understand it's a little bit more complicated than that. Your brain, if you haven't eaten since breakfast, no matter how hard you try, is producing ghrelin. Has anybody in the room tried the diet? Hopefully not, right? You're also damn young. Anybody tried a diet ever? Good, keep it that way. But if you try a diet, a low-calorie diet, what's the problem with a low-calorie diet, meaning restricting your eating? Can anybody imagine? When you wake up Monday morning and say, I'm not going to eat, and I want to try to, thin out a little bit for the wedding, your body starts making ghrelin. And then by the afternoon, when you haven't eaten and you're about to eat the person sitting next to you, your body is making even more ghrelin. This is the problem with depriving yourself of calories. Your body's actually fighting that. Questions on this? So are there ways you can kind of influence this? Sure. The heavier, the fatter the food, the more quickly your body produces ghrelin. What's a good way to slow the production of ghrelin? Well, just eat stuff that's energy poor or calorie poor or I'll say nutritionally deficient. Who's ever been to the movie theater? Everybody see the size of the popcorn buckets at the movie theater? I'm the big guy getting the biggest like I get a popcorn bucket that I could swim in after I'm done with it, that kind of thing. Eat all that, and then I go, okay, I'm gonna go to the bathroom, I come back with another bucket of popcorn. Anybody ever do this with potato chips? Okay, you eat the bag of potato chips, you invert the bag on your head, then you get another bag, right? Why can you do this? You're eating thousands of calories of either corn or potatoes. How come you can do that? Well, those sugars, we'll find out, don't really promote a tremendous production of this hormone. Think about it if I told you to go home tonight and eat a stick of butter. Could you even do that? Try to imagine doing that. Or if I told you to go home tonight and eat avocados. How many avocados could you possibly eat before you threw up? What do you think? 2? 3? How many? 11? 2? Okay, 2. At the third, your body's going, all right, fat ass, back away from the table. You don't eat any more avocado. You shouldn't have eaten the seed. So ghrelin is produced much more fast and abundantly when you eat a saturated fat or protein than when you eat sugar. This is why many of you will find yourself swimming inside a fucking potato chip bag because those calories are kind of empty. You ever hear that phrase before, empty calories? So those calories, unfortunately, from junk food that we all love, myself included, don't really add up. They don't really promote a release of ghrelin. Don't try this. I'm just giving you a hypothetical. If you went home tonight and had a quarter of a stick of butter, you would eat it, you'd feel terrible about yourself, and you would not want to eat for a while. Because that saturated fat would hit your stomach like a fucking bomb, and then you wouldn't be hungry for a while. So ghrelin and leptin are a big hormonal part of the puzzle as to why we overeat or don't overeat. And you could probably see that if someone's parents are morbidly obese, that individual has a higher chance of being what? Obese. Ever notice that pattern? Notice how you never see a really skinny person and their parents are huge. Why is that? Because it's not just how much you're eating, it's about the hormonal controls that you really can't do much to influence, okay? Questions on this? Of course, we talked to a bunch of 17-year-olds, so eat whatever the hell you want. You basically have you're basically indestructible. So go ahead and eat whatever you want. It'll change when you hit your mid-20s. Questions on regulation of your appetite? Okay. So we talked about eating 28 oranges, which is insane. And then let's talk about organs that food does not pass through, but play a huge role in digestion. So your liver, which is where? Anybody know? It's about here, okay? Your liver is gigantic, it's the largest organ in your abdomen, but food doesn't go through it. If food is going through your liver, get to a hospital, something's gone terribly wrong, right? So the liver makes a very important material that you need to know by name called bile. And bile is really important in the breakdown of what? Fat or lipids. If you don't make bile, fat just comes right out of you. I'll let you figure out the mechanism, but basically you would be leaking fat all the time, okay? Bile is brown, it has a unique odor, it's a little slippery, and it's part of the reason our waste is the color and smell that it is. Birds don't have bile. What color is their poop? Just look at my car, right? It's white for the most part. So bile allows us to break down fats. Without it, the fat just kind of flies out of you. There's a lot of other roles it plays in relation to your metabolic life, but the things that it does in relation to digestion, which is what we're talking about today, is it helps keep your blood sugar normal. It's a place where most things can be broken down outside of the stomach, so to speak. So protein, sugar, and fat, they're metabolized or broken down, cut up into little pieces inside the liver. Questions on this? Some of the vitamins you're getting from the food you're eating are stored there, and the second to last bullet point shows, again, what I was just mentioning, which is there are other roles of it not related to digestion. So when you have the ability to clot, you might ever get a cut and then a scab forms, those proteins are produced actually by the liver and then released into your bloodstream so you don't bleed to death, okay? So when we talk about macro versus micronutrients, macros, which is the term I'll use, I won't say macronutrients, are your carbohydrates, your lipids, and your proteins. These categories should seem familiar. They're the biologically important molecule categories. We leave DNA out because no one's eating DNA, okay? Micronutrients are things you need in very what? Small quantity, vitamins and minerals. It is absolutely possible to kill yourself with vitamin C. So we need to kind of discuss having too much of vitamins and minerals in a little bit, okay? So what do you do with food? You metabolize, you break down food to make what? Fun. You break down food to make, there it is on the board again, ATP. That's the whole purpose for eating. What we're showing you here is how either sugar you've consumed or sugar that is found in fat can be broken down from glucose into something called pyruvate. This textbook calls it pyruvic acid, but it's basically the same whether you call it pyruvate or pyruvic acid. Pyruvate is P-Y-R-U-V-A-T-E. Since I'm a dinosaur, I learned it as pyruvate, not pyruvic acid. Questions so far? So the breakdown of sugar is something called glycolysis. That's something, if you don't know already, underline it, it's already in bold, I wonder why. Glycolysis is the breakdown of sugar, and it happens inside the cell, but in a very specific place, in the water inside the cell. So when we discussed water, we said 70% of the planet is water. We said 70% of your cells is water. So the water of the cell, which is called the cytoplasm, is where glycolysis occurs. Now, I don't want you to get confused. It says it's an anaerobic process here. That doesn't mean you can put a bag over your head and glycolysis will still happen. Inside your cells, there are parts of your body that are very anaerobic. What does anaerobic mean? Not a lot of oxygen, actually no oxygen at all. So the muscle that's in your feet right now, not your legs, your feet, that's kind of an anaerobic bunch of muscle because there's not a lot of oxygen there. So anaerobic means the absence of oxygen. If you get rid of the A in the end, you call it aerobic, that means the presence of oxygen. So we are aerobic organisms, that's certainly true. You need to breathe to survive. But there are parts of your body that are anaerobic. One of those states would be inside the cell. This inside of the cell itself doesn't have a lot of oxygen. So we're making a little bit of ATP. When you get to a genuine biology class at the college level, you'll have to learn that there's about 16 steps between glucose and pyruvate. You can all wipe the sweat off your forehead, you don't have to know that, okay? But you do need to know that we produce 2 ATP from this. So where does that sugar come from? You've just had a candy bar, an apple, or your body has broken up some fat for you and released the sugar from inside your fat cells. So I'm not telling you that the sugar in a Snickers bar is the same as the sugar in an apple, but as far as your body's concerned, it basically is. I'm not saying to tell your parents, he said don't eat fruit, I can have a candy bar. It's the same glucose. One's created in a lab, the other one's created on a tree by nature, but it's ultimately the same sugar. Where else can you get the sugar? You get the sugar from fat cells as your fat cells shrink when you exercise. That's the problem with fat, right? The only real way to lose fat is what? Anybody know? To permanently get fat cells off your body, what's the only technique you can do? You said something? Work out. That's the slowest way to lose fat. Exercise is the slowest way to lose fat, unfortunately. What else can you do? What? Surgical removal of fat, like a what? Like a Kardashian? Yeah, you pay a doctor, right, with a pinky finger ring, and to suck fat out of your body.
Lower the amount of food.
That's certainly true. What you would call fasting, reducing the calories you're eating and trying to burn more calories, that's somewhere between what she said and his answer of exercise. So the only permanent way to pull fat out of your body is to actually pay someone to suck it out of you, which none of us are going to do, right? Anybody going to go for liposuction this summer? So the unfortunate reality is we have to lose fat really slowly by what you're saying, which is consume less, burn more calories. But the fat cells, they don't disappear. What happens to them? They just go from being really big to what? Thin. That's literally what happens. And then they're waiting for you to do what? Start eating again. As soon as you start eating, those cells fill up. So fat is filled with sugar. When you have a piece of fruit at 10 o'clock at night and you're feeling good about yourself, you pat yourself on the back, you say you had an apple, congratulations, that apple becomes fat as you're sleeping. Unless you run in your sleep. Does anybody run in their sleep? Like a dog with your feet up in the air, moving all night long? Unless you're conducting exercise while you're unconscious, you can eat a banana right before you go to bed, it'll become fat. So that's it's really the notion of when you're eating. If you have a piece of fruit in the morning, it's almost impossible that will become fat because you're going to stay awake for what? 15 hours, 16 hours? Hopefully you're going to move around a little bit, right? But if you have a piece of fruit lying in bed, it'll become fat. There's just no way thermodynamically that doesn't happen, okay? Does any of this sound incorrect, or anybody think that I'm wrong, or anybody think that they've heard something differently from their aunt or something, or their uncle? No? Everybody all right? Okay. So glycolysis, the breakdown of glucose into pyruvate, and that is happening inside the cytoplasm of all of your cells. So whether it's a red blood cell or a brain cell, it's happening the same way. A further reduction of pyruvate into an even smaller sugar is the Krebs cycle. Now, luckily for you, this thing is insanely complicated with 36 steps. You don't have to learn any of it. But where does this happen? This is something you must know. It happens in the organelle that we use to make energy, which is called the mitochondria. So the mitochondria, which are the ATP-producing organelle of the cell, they produce energy for us all day long as you're breathing and eating. That's the actual site of something called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. So in all of your cells, most preferentially in your muscle cells, you are using mitochondria to produce ATP. So you don't need to know what else is produced by this process, but it's important to understand that this is happening in your cells, in the mitochondria of your cells, and it's producing more ATP for you, okay? So if you are curious, it's the further breakdown of pyruvate into carbon dioxide. What can you do with carbon dioxide? How much energy do you think carbon dioxide has? It's got no energy, right? What can you do with carbon dioxide? You can kill something with it, right? You're exhaling it, or you can exhale it and knock somebody out with your bad breath, right? That's carbon dioxide. That's all it is. There's no energy value to it. We understand this? Questions on either glycolysis or the Krebs cycle? Okay. There's that ATP picture again. I wonder why he's put it in 2 lectures in a row. Gee, what the hell does that mean? So ATP, adenosine triphosphate, the most important energy molecule in the body. Like a battery, it can exist in a charged or a what? Uncharged state. What's the uncharged state called? Adenosine diphosphate. So you can see that there's a squiggly line connecting one phosphate atom to the next. Those are high energy bonds. You don't have to know them by their name yet. But when those bonds break, you can literally see it with the naked eye. It's like a spark. So these are high energy bonds used to make every muscle in the body move, whether it's the muscles that are moving your eyeballs or your biceps, it doesn't matter, okay? So you can generate ATP from anything. You can eat paper, not that this is a good idea, and you can make ATP. You could eat butter, you could eat grass, and you can make ATP. The true fact that people have kind of confused so that they talk exclusively about the health benefits of sugar is that carbohydrates are the easiest and most fast way of getting ATP. That's certainly true. Do you guys have a class after this? Anybody? You do? In this building? Okay, somewhere else? So, between classes, you might grab a candy bar. And you will feel what after you've consumed the candy bar? Anybody? Aside from depressed, what do you feel? A little burst of energy, correct? Everybody familiar with this? You have some sugar, you feel a burst of energy. How long does that burst of energy last? Till tomorrow? It lasts about an hour, and then you're asleep in the next guy's class. So the statement on the board, it is correct, but carbohydrates are not a long-term energy storage. They're not there forever, the way fat and protein can be used. That's why we hold fat and protein on our body. We don't really store sugar anywhere aside from in this place called glycogen, which I'm not going to make you learn now, okay? What I will make you learn is the effects of having sugar in the body. Who's heard of this hormone? We talked about it already. Insulin. Anybody have a relative who's diabetic? What does a person who's diabetic have to do? They have to monitor their blood glucose, and they have to maybe inject themselves with insulin throughout the course of the day. And assuming I don't have any type 1 diabetic individuals in the room, probably nobody has to do that. Who's doing that for you? What organ is doing this for you? Anybody? Starts with a P, followed by a good pancreas. So insulin takes sugar out of your blood and pushes it into your cells. Why is it good to do that? Why don't you want sugar in your blood for many hours? What happens? What are some of the things that happen to diabetics? They go blind eventually. Sugar accumulates in their nerves and their eyes. What happens to their fingers and their toes? Sometimes they have to have them amputated because of what? Poor blood flow. What does blood flow have to do with sugar? Well, if you fill up your blood with sugar, guess what it moves like? It moves like mud, basically, right? And the slower your blood moves, the slower what else moves inside your blood? Oxygen. And if you don't think you need oxygen in your toes, take your belt off now, wrap it around your foot really tight, and wait 2 days. Your foot will fall off, right? You need oxygen everywhere, from your fingertips to your toes. What are some other effects? By the way, this is how men end up going to a doctor with diabetes. There are really small arteries, fellas. Where? In what important part of our body might there be small arteries? In the penis, right? So when a 23-year-old man who's never monitored his diabetes before has a side effect, you know what the side effect is? Impotence, meaning cannot get or maintain an erection. That usually sends a guy to the doctor. That's how diabetes shows up in young men. Unless they know they have diabetes because their parents have diabetes, it's how it appears. So there's little arteries all over the body, in the eyes, no offense fellas, in the penis, in your toes and your fingers, and when they get clogged, there's no way to unclog them. They get clogged with sugar. So that's why insulin is such an important hormone. So if you don't have insulin, you literally have to take it in needle format and stab yourself with it. That way you move the sugar out of your blood, okay? Questions on this? So after this class, if you grab a candy bar to wake yourself up for your commute home or your next class, you will have sugar in your blood at 6:30. That doesn't mean it should stay there till tomorrow morning. It'll be moved out of your blood into your cells by the action of insulin. Okay? Any questions on this? Everybody all right? Fat metabolism. Can you break down fat? Certainly, right? We love breaking down fat. Why? It's highly energy rich. We can also break down fat that we've got attached to our body, right? Like what? Abdominal fat, gluteal fat, right? We could break down that fat into sugar and use that to power what process? Glycolysis, right? This is the fundamental mechanism of exercise. You break down fat cells, get them to release sugar, and now you're lighter on the scale. So what's the actual name of fat cells? They're called adipose or adipocytes. Adipose is fine. So adipose tissue is fat. Does anybody know what color fat is on your body? If you were to cut yourself open in the belly region, you'd see what color? Yellow. So your fat tissue is actually yellowish, and if it's a fat tissue like a hibernating animal, like a bear, it'll be brown. But adipose tissue, which we carry all over our body, you do need fat. You need fat as a what? Kind of like a cushion, as well as an energy store. But we carry fat in different places, which has effects for our health. Where do men carry most of their fat? Since I'm the only fat one in the room, I'll tell you. In the abdomen. Ladies, where do you carry your fat one day? In the abdomen? Not really. Where do women put on their weight initially? Where do you think, ladies? In their thighs and glutes. Are there any important organs in your hips and your ass? Not really. Are there any important organs, fellas, around here, from your belt up to your chest? Any important organs in here? All of them, right? So adipose tissue held on the stomach is kind of deadly. That's why men don't live as long as women. And adipose tissue held on your glutes and your thighs and your ass doesn't really have an effect on your health, okay? So that's fat metabolism. So we certainly can survive in a world where fat is the only thing on the menu. Are there cultures on Earth today that only eat fat? Anybody know of any? Has anybody heard of the Inuits? Anybody know where those people are from? They used to be called Eskimos. I don't think that's a safe word anymore. I think I'm going to offend someone if I say Eskimo. What's an Eskimo, or what's an Inuit? Someone who lives north of here, right, in Canada. And what do they eat? They build their houses out of snow. What do they eat all year long?
Fish.
Fish and whales and seals. What are fish, whales, and seals made out of? Protein and
Iron.
mostly fat. So these people have been eating fat and protein for thousands of years. They don't have heart attacks. You know when they started having heart attacks? When we started sending them potato chips. So fat metabolism, processing only fat, is certainly possible to get energy. It's ideal if you're trying to lose weight, because if you eat avocados, as we joked about earlier, you can't have half a dozen avocados unless something's wrong with you. Maybe you have a hole somewhere, right? So if you have a saturated fat that's healthy for you, like olive oil or avocado oil or coconut oil, you're going to feel full, you're going to eat less, and you're going to have that deadly hormone. What's that hormone that we talked about that influences our ability to detect whether or not we're going to be hungry? Ghrelin is going to be satisfied, right? You're not going to make a lot of ghrelin if you're eating coconut oil. Anybody ever eat coconut oil or avocado oil? These are really rich things. You can't have a lot of these food products because they're saturated fats. Protein. Can you eat protein exclusively? Sure. It's another great way to lose weight if you need to one day. So protein can be broken down for energy. If you find yourself stranded on a boat floating out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, eventually your body will start breaking down the protein on you, meaning your muscles, in order to feed you. But for the most part, that can't happen if you're stuck here on land, okay? When you're eating protein, a miraculous process happens called gluconeogenesis. What do you think this thing means? Well, if glycolysis is the breakdown of sugar, like glucose into pyruvate, gluconeogenesis is probably what? The conversion of non-glucose back into glucose. Why do you need to make glucose? There's one organ in your body that needs a little bit of glucose every day, otherwise bad stuff will happen. What's a very important organ in your body that preferentially wants glucose? You're using it right now. I can smell wood burning. Your brain, right? So glucose is the preferential food source for your brain. So you need to have a little bit of sugar every day. Not zero, a little bit of sugar. If you are stuck somewhere and the only thing on the menu is protein, will you survive? Sure. You'll take the breakdown of protein and convert it back to sugar for your brain. Your brain doesn't need as much sugar that's in a candy bar, though, so let's be clear. We're talking about 20 grams or less. Questions on this? Okay, so vitamins. Who takes vitamins every day? Anybody? One person, one healthy person in the room? So vitamins, here's the scary part about vitamins. The most recent studies have shown that probably there's little to no effect from taking a multivitamin. But I'm a big hypocrite, and probably you won't stop either. I take a multivitamin every day because I figure, what the hell, it's not gonna hurt. Well, take a look at the board. It could hurt potentially if you're having too much of it. What's the problem with something called hypervitaminosis? Which even if you're illiterate, you can figure out what that word means, right? Hypervitaminosis. You couldn't think of a better name? Well, you can kill yourself with vitamin C. You can damage your DNA with vitamin C if you have too much of it. Why would you ever do this? Well, let's talk about how men behave. Men get the bottle of Tylenol out of the cabinet and says, take 2. And men go, well, if 2 will work well. And they open the bottle and they pour the entire bottle down their throat, right? The problem is the dosage. So we commonly, men and women do this, but we commonly suffer from, hey, if one vitamin is making me feel better, why don't I take 37 today? So vitaminosis is when you actually are slowly poisoning yourself with a particular vitamin. Avitaminosis, remember you put an A in front of anything, it means lack or less than or opposite, is when you have a deficiency of vitamins. If you don't have any citrus, you'll develop something called scurvy, which is where your teeth and your gums kind of rot. This is why it's important to have some vitamin C. We commonly get our vitamin C from where? Where do you end up consuming a lot of your vitamin C from? Hopefully from citrus. So I'm not saying don't drink orange juice. I'm saying when you do drink your orange juice, realize that you would have had to eat 4 oranges to get the same amount of citrus.
Can we get vitamin C from the sunshine?
No, it's vitamin D. So vitamin D you synthesize in the presence of UV light. But, it's, basically everybody in New York has a vitamin D deficiency. You understand why? We don't get enough sunlight this time of the year. If you were to look at all of our blood in August, none of us have a vitamin D deficiency. So, you understand? So to also think, it doesn't mean you have to go out into the courtyard with a towel and lay out and get a tan in the middle of the day. What it means is you need sunlight bouncing in the room. Is there any sunlight in this room right now? No, but if I open that door, you will be getting sunlight indirectly. It bounces off the walls, the radiation. So it's not that you have to have direct sunlight, you need to have some sunlight, okay? Other question. So that's what that vitamin D did, okay? I'm not gonna ask you any particular questions about these vitamins on an exam. I will ask you about the difference between vitamins and minerals though, so let's look. Vitamins are organic, minerals are inorganic. Basically, that means you have to eat minerals from the ground. And I'm not saying go outside, head dive into a bush and eat the soil. What I am telling you is that these minerals commonly come to us either in supplemental format, like you're taking a pill, or because you're eating a plant that grew in the ground. So what's an important mineral you've perhaps heard of that you need in order to move oxygen around the body? That you get from things like meat or spinach? Anybody? No one's anemic in the room, huh? Called iron, right? Anybody anemic? I should ask that question. So if you don't have enough iron in your blood, you'll have a hard time moving oxygen. This would be really problematic, especially if you're a female. So minerals work their way up into plants, that's certainly possible, or you can go to the vitamin store down the block and buy them there in pill format, okay? So organic versus inorganic, this could come from multiple things. These basically come out of the ground, or they're coming into the root system of a plant that you're then going to eat, okay? Questions on vitamins versus minerals? Everybody all right? Okay. So, metabolism. We mentioned that earlier in the lecture in talking about how your metabolism is your ability to get energy from the environment. That's certainly a true way of describing it. But how else have you heard the word metabolism used? Sometimes you hear people say, oh, I have my father's metabolism, so I put on weight easier. It's kind of a correct, but not really a correct statement, so let's look. There's what's called basal metabolic rate. What does the word basal mean? Anybody? Like the, what, baseline, the what's called constitutively active level. It's what you would expect to have every day. So your basal metabolic rate, where does that come from? Take a look at the factors. How big you are, your gender, how much fat you've got on you, how old you are, and then this. What the hell is a thyroid hormone? Where's your thyroid gland? In your neck, and that is a big director of your metabolic activity. And what else? If you're sick, if you're taking any medication, if you've got some emotional stress functioning as triggers, So again, the factors that determine your metabolism is not just your age. It's how big or small you are, right? Your gender, how much fat you've got on your body, how much hormone from your thyroid is produced, and what else you're putting in your body exogenously, meaning do you have Tylenol in your body because you are sick that day. These factors are kind of hard to influence immediately. What are some factors you can influence? The things that add up to your total metabolic rate, which would be what? Do you exercise? What the hell are you eating, right? And also, are you shivering, are you warm, are you at a normal temperature? So your total metabolic rate for you as an individual comes from some factors you cannot change. Can you change your sex? Not really. You can change your gender, right? If you're Bruce Jenner, you can become Caitlyn Jenner, but that's still a guy. Can you change your size? Not really. Can you change your fat to muscle ratio? Not immediately. That would take a while. Can you change your age? Of course not. And your thyroid hormone, unless you take medicine, you can't change it. And then this, you know, if you have a chronic condition, you can't not take the medication for it. And if you're under stress, that's an emotional trigger, you can't really maybe influence that. But these things here, these are the big factors that we want to kind of forget about, but we shouldn't forget about. The greatest way to change your metabolic pathways would be to gain or lose a lot of weight. So, not saying to do this as an experiment, but if you gained 100 pounds or lost 100 pounds, metabolically you'd be an entirely different person. Has anybody heard of someone going for a gastric bypass surgery? What's gastric bypass? Anybody know? Gastric bypass? You have any idea?
It makes them like
What?
become more full while
You
eating
become more
less.
full while eating less. Why? What they do to the person? They remove most of their stomach. So it's a surgery where you cut out the stomach. How big is your stomach now? Anybody know? On average. And you take your two hands and go like this. That's about the size of your stomach. If you're morbidly obese, it's about this, plus two more hands, plus two more hands, plus your head, right? So, the stomach size is how much you can fit in your body during a feast. Many people are happily holding their hands together now for some reason. So, if you eat a lot of food, if you overeat, what will happen to your stomach? Does
Doesn't it
anybody know?
expand?
It'll expand. And if you restrict the amount of food you're eating, what will happen?
It shrinks.
It'll shrink. Now, how fast does that happen? What do you think?
So is it really this
Takes a
big?
couple days. Most people are going to quit
Where's
their
the
diet
left?
before that. So if you ate 500 calories a day for the next 7 days, we could literally, with a ruler, measure a smaller stomach. I don't mean measuring around your stomach. I mean your actual organ has shrunk substantially. So the gastric bypass procedure is where they cut out a person's stomach. Do they do that for you or me? Who do they do that for? Someone who's at least 100 pounds overweight and likely to die from complications from their being overweight. So when they remove the stomach of that person, they literally change their metabolism. You mentioned it a moment ago. You said when you don't have your stomach, are you eating a lot? You're eating very small volume and what? More frequent. So you're eating what you would call snacks 6 or 7 times a day. You're not having meals anymore. That's a great person to take out on a date because they can't fucking eat anything. Very cheap date, okay? Questions on that? Everybody understand your total metabolic rate versus your basal metabolic rate? This is kind of guaranteed exam questions. Does everybody know what a multiple answer question is? If you don't, I can explain. A multiple answer question, like the one I'm probably going to show you from this slide, would be phrased the following way. Identify all the factors involved in the basal metabolic rate. And on the screen in front of you, this appear, and so does these 3 things. And you have to identify all 6 correct factors and leave off the 3 that aren't correct. That's a multiple answer question, not multiple choice. Multiple choice is it's one answer. Multiple answer is, hey, there's 6 right answers and 3 wrong answers. I have to select just the 6 that are correct. Does everybody know what that is now? Kind of tricky, okay? Questions before I move on? Okay. So, what can happen that can interrupt your metabolism? You can have what are called inborn errors. This is like a genetic condition. Part of what I mentioned earlier, when someone is obese, if you look at their parents, generally you don't see what? Skinny people. You see obese people. That's what we mean by inborn. Literally, you are transmitting from parent to offspring a incorrect metabolism. That's not a judgmental statement. I'm not making fun of fat people. I'm saying that's something that probably is mostly out of their hands. Then there are real big imbalances like disorders such as the following. Who's heard of anorexia? Anorexia, more common in women than in men, but men can get anorexia, is where you're basically not eating. Also, anorexic people will look at themselves in the mirror as skinny, and they'll still identify themselves as being what? Overweight, fat, okay? So there's plenty of famous images of this, of an anorexic person trying to pull their skin, going, look at how fat I am, and they basically don't have any fat. Does anybody know why this strikes women more than men? Anybody have any thoughts? Any ladies have any thoughts why you're more likely to suffer from that than the men are? So the theory coming out of the world of psychology is that women can influence their fertility by how much weight they have. Do we know what I'm talking about, ladies? If you were to stop ovulating, meaning you can't have kids, how do you stop ovulating? Well, anybody watch the Olympics recently? All of those Olympic athletes, the females, they're not getting their period. Why? What? Not steroids. Well, it could be. It's good. But, by the way, pessimistic world, but yes, you're correct. Yeah, it could be steroids. But most women that are going to try to run in next week's half marathon in New York City, or the marathon, they'll stop ovulating. They'll stop menstruating. Why? Not enough fat. So nature knows if you don't have a certain amount of fat on your body, you can't have a baby grow inside you. What happens with morbidly obese women? What happens to their periods? Disappear. Why? Nature says you have too much fat on you to have a baby. So the thought process for anorexia, it's going to sound bizarre, is that women suffering from poor self-image will starve themselves so that they can't what? Reproduce. They have such poor self-image, they don't want a baby version of themselves coming out. That's insane, right? Men would never do that to themselves. What do men do? Men are more likely to have this. Bulimia. What's bulimia, fellas? Sometimes characterized as body dysmorphia. It's when you're having food come in, and then you do what? Then you go to the bathroom, stick your finger down your throat, and you throw up all the food. Common for male athletes, common for male bodybuilders, men that are trying to, by the way, a lot of your male movie stars are doing this. That's how they look great in a bikini and you don't, or a bathing suit, whatever the fuck. So bulimia, more common in men, but women can suffer from it as well, is a kind of a purging syndrome, okay? Questions on this? So these are psychological disorders that have a hormonal component to them, but they're usually brought on, unfortunately, the common factor would be childhood trauma. So what I mean by childhood trauma is, there's an uncle that comes to visit, he molests you physically, emotionally, sexually, whatever, that's childhood trauma. So I'm not saying everybody who's been abused as a child is going to develop this. What I'm telling you is if you look at all of these sufferers, most of them have a history of childhood abuse, okay? Questions on this? What's obesity? So this is when you're at least 30 pounds overweight. So to be completely transparent with you, I am at least 30 pounds overweight. So if you're 1 pound overweight to 29 pounds overweight, we just call you what? Overweight. When you're 30 pounds or more overweight from what you're supposed to be, you're technically considered obese. So I'm not obese, I don't think, from an eating disorder. I'm obese from the fact that, hey, I like to eat pizza occasionally and I don't exercise enough. But obesity is, in this country, what? It's becoming a major factor for mortality, okay? How so? Well, food is so abundant now, we don't have to worry about hunting for it. What do I mean by that, hunting for food? We used to wake up and do what with most of our day? Hunt. I don't mean last year. I mean 100,000 years ago, man would wake up, he would be thankful to the gods he survived the night, and then what would men and women have to do? They'd have to dig in the ground for worms or nuts, or they'd have to hunt. And then around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, they found a squirrel that was stupid enough to look from near, and they're going to eat a squirrel. That was food. If you're hungry now, how far do you have to walk before I can find you food? What do you think? 37 feet from the door, there's a vending machine, right? And how expensive is that food? It's $1. For how many calories? About 250 calories. If you showed cavemen a vending machine and said, this is only $1, they would stab you and then take the food out of the vending machine. They would be so surprised that food was so cheap relative to the amount of energy that's put in it. But what's the problem with the food in the vending machine? It's calorie poor, it's nutrient deficient. Potato chips are not the best idea if you're trying to actually nourish your body. Think about how crazy you are about food. Does everybody know that in this country, 3 people a year die from vending machines? 3 Americans die from a vending machine. How do they die? They put $1 in, not that they eat twice, put $1 in, the thing turns, the cookie doesn't drop. So what do? Well, they're angry. What do? They're shoving their entire fist up into the machine, and they pull the machine on top of themselves, they kill themselves. Accidentally, of course. That's how abundant food is, right? People will literally accidentally murder themselves trying to fight a bag of potato chips from inside a vending machine, which only costs $1, right? Nobody think, I'm not crying for those people. I don't want them having kids. You know what I'm saying? Let Darwin clean up a little bit. Questions on eating disorders? Everybody all right? Just as kind of a public health statement, we're almost done. If you feel you have any of these kind of behaviors, this is something that early on you can really tackle just by talking. I don't mean talking to your best friend about it, I'm talking with basically either a counselor or a therapist. So nobody in the room should be above talking about their problems. Why? Usually it's a great way to stop a problem before it becomes pathological. What I mean by pathological is now we need to hospitalize you and feed you with a tube in your stomach to fix the problem. So these things present as little nuances first. You decide, hey, I don't want to eat, and then you find yourself once a month throwing up intentionally because you feel like you've gained too much weight. That once a month purging could very easily become once a week purging. So whether you're male or female, these have very characteristic signs, which is you find yourself at a nice restaurant with your family on a holiday pushing around a fucking food with a fork. If you find yourself doing that, that's this starting maybe. If you find yourself thinking of vomiting as a technique to help you fit into the pants a little bit better, that's a problem with your thinking. It needs to be evaluated, okay? Does anybody like throwing up? Okay. What would you describe the feeling of vomiting as? Painful, not something you want to do necessarily, right? So if these things become intrusive, you should really discuss it with someone, okay? And I'm not saying your best friend or your parents. All of your schools are equipped with counselors, okay? Questions on this? Last slide for the day. So, how do we regulate body temperature? Well, we have some hundreds of millions of year-old mechanisms like goosebumps. Every animal that's a mammal has goosebumps like we do. What's the purpose of these things? Anybody ever get goosebumps? First time you walked into class and saw me, you got them, right? You're looking, oh, Jesus, look at this guy. What's the purpose of goosebumps? Why would your skin make this happen? What happens to a cat when it's scared? What does it do? Kind of rounds its back and its hair stands up on edge. It tries to look what?
Bigger.
Bigger. That's literally the same mechanism. Is the professor saying we're related to cats? Not recently, meow. I'm saying in a couple hundred millions of years ago, we diverged from the same ancestor. That's a behavior that allows you to make yourself look bigger, but that's not why we have goosebumps. Why do we have goosebumps? We have goosebumps to trap warm air against our skin. When you make a little forest on your arm of hair, right, you can hold warm air against your skin. That's the purpose of goosebumps. So the regulation of our temperature is actually done in our brain, deep in our brain, by something called the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus has a couple tricks up its sleeve to mechanize temperature loss. And they're shown here. You can either radiate heat. Has anybody ever felt someone sweating and you hold your hand over their face and it actually feels warm? That's radiation. Conduction, this is when you intentionally take something cold and put it on your head to conduct heat. Convection is when you're blowing the heat off, right? Standing in front of a fan looking ridiculous. Or evaporation is what sweat is, right? So the purpose of sweat is not to cool you down. Sweat does not cool you down at all. Sweat gives you the illusion of you cooling down. Why so? When you have moisture on your skin and wind goes over it, you feel cooler than you are. Dogs, do they sweat? Dogs don't sweat. What do? How do they get warm air out of their body? They pant, right? Most animals don't sweat the way we do. We sweat because we don't have fur, okay? If these things are not working correctly, you may find yourself doing what? Shivering if you're cold enough, which is a really rudimentary way of generating heat by making muscles fire, okay? All of this is considered to be a mechanism for what's called thermoregulation, okay? Questions on this? Everybody all right? So just some quick housekeeping. Nobody should be too worried about doing any lab reports yet, because we've only had one lab. As I mentioned at the beginning of class, still no Blackboard access. Hopefully they're trying to work on that. And then this is the almost conclusion of the second lecture topic. There will only be one more lecture topic after this before we have a lecture exam. Okay, so you should expect after you get the next set of notes, to also get a review sheet. Either I email it to you or I put it on Blackboard, and you will have your all the material you need to start studying for the first lecture exam. Okay? Questions? Everybody all right? Okay, have a wonderful day. I'll see you in 2 days for lab. And yeah,